Welcome. I'm recording here from rural Ecuador, and you'll hear some noises in the background, some roosters and hens, and maybe some other noises around, a little bit of an echo, but it's all part of the fun here. Welcome to Food in the Desert Part 4. Today we're going to focus on a pretty well-known passage, and we're going to see what we can find in the passage for food, and this is what we've been doing so far. We're going to put it into practice and do it again. So let's go forward. We're going to look at the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is the first of the Gospels. And this is the method, is that we're going to look for connecting words, phrases, especially particular words, phrases that stand out. And we're going to find them in another place, look for the existence, them to show up in other places. And when we connect those, we see those words or phrases or ideas as connectors, kind of like stitches, stitching them, different passages together, we can begin to read those passages together, and it gives us light. And in that, we then get food as well. So what we're doing, the review from before, is we're following really the way that the Gospels were written, which was sort of a gathering together and a stitching together and integrating together of writings and being sort of sewn and knit together through the writing of the author, as well as their new writings, as well as the ones that already exist, to come up with this integrated whole. And the idea is this can happen in different locations throughout each of the Gospels, and that we look at each Gospel separately. And then we can compare the Gospels. We look at two in order to compare and then discern and distinguish more clearly what each one is, or what it might better be said, what is specific to each one. And this helps us to isolate pairings, and maybe two or even three that kind of have the same phrase together. We begin to read those passages together as being sewn or knit together. So that's the idea. And when we do that, we begin to hear this voice, because we're reading the Gospel in the same way in which it was composed and written and compiled. And by doing that, we really enter into closeness to the author, and we hear the voice. And now that author is a human author, in this case Matthew, and whoever's writing behind them, human, but it's also divine, because it's the Holy Spirit as well as the human person who are together writing this Gospel. So today, we're going to start with Matthew chapter 16. It's verse 13 to 26. And I'm going to read this kind of quickly, and we'll pass through it one time. When Jesus went into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter said in reply, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus said to him in reply, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly ordered his disciples to tell no one that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you." He turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit would there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can one give in exchange for his life?" Now there's a lot going on here, but I want to call up this one word it's kind of this big word that's inside here that has been used by people in church since the scriptures were first written. In translations and understanding of this particular part of the passage, where it says, "And I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it." This word rock, and what does this mean? Because this is going to open up a deep meaning of this passage we're going to see. What does this all mean here? And now you've got this rock, and then you've got a church, and you've got gates of netherworld, and prevailing against it, and then you've got loosening, and you've got all these things. So rock is the word that I want to look at. And let's see if this word rock shows up somewhere else in Matthew. Is there a clue of the stitch? How this is stitched to another passage that's going to give us that light and then give us the food inside of that. So this is the kind of the method. Now ask, and we go to look, we go to seek. So a word may come to you, and this is what I did. I said rock, and there was an idea that came to me, and I followed through on it. So here's the passage anyways. It's kind of one I've used to refer to this kind of process is asking. Ask, it will be given to you. Seeking, and you will find. Knock, the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. So this is the searching part of, is there another stitch hole, another stitch mark? And sure enough, I did. There's another place where a rock shows up again. And that is in Matthew 27. And there's a whole part that then continues over into chapter 28. So let's look at these two together. We're going to see if there's maybe food there, and there's something that's going to be able to give us light and then nourishment. So let's start looking at this. I have this Matthew 16 on the left as before, and let's go through starting at Matthew 27. It's the burial of Jesus. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was himself a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be handed over. Taking the body, Joseph wrapped it in clean linen and laid it in his new tomb that he had hewn in the rock. Then he rolled a huge stone across the entrance to the tomb and departed. But Mary Magdalene and the other Mary remained sitting there facing the tomb. Here is the word. Now see, we're going to see that these words, the word over in 16 and here in 27, it is stitching together these two passages. So we're going to read them together, linked by this word. So look at what we have is we have this word rock, Peter, and upon this rock. And then over here we have a rock that's hollowed out, and there's a tomb. So right away we have this relationship that, hey, the rock, upon this rock, there's a connotation of a tomb. And here is a rock, and now this is going to come back into the other side here. So let's go forward. The guard at the tomb. The next passage. Now this does not exist in the other Gospels. This part of having a guard at the tomb. Let's hear. The next day, the one following the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that this impostor, while still alive, said, 'After 3 days I will be raised up.' Give orders then that the grave be secured until the third day, lest the disciples come and steal him away and say to the people, 'He's been raised from the dead.' This last imposture would be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "The guard is yours. Go, secure it as best you can." So they went and secured the tomb by fixing a seal to the stone and setting the guard. So what's going on here? There's a little... there's a lot that we're gonna move to that. The other word you may have noticed, and people who have looked at the Bible before might know that Peter comes from the Greek word Petros, and that is the actual word for rock. It's the male form of the word for rock. So rock actually shows up here, and there's another couple of places over here that Peter shows up. But I just note that for now. We'll come back to that. But to know that, hey, this connection is happening here, and then now you've got another sort of connection that the author is making between here and the rock. Now, upon this rock I will build my church. There's one phrase. We're going to come back. We're going to focus on that. And first, I want to focus on this one. The gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. So the gates of the netherworld is the place of the dead, or Hades in the Greek there. Hades is the place where dead people are, where you go when you die. So there's gates, and the idea of gates is that it's that everyone's going to enter the netherworld. The whole idea of the gates is that you can't get back out. It's like the Roach Motel, if you remember those commercials. The roaches check in, but they don't check out. So the idea of the gates is that that once you go into death, you can never get out. That's the end of the story. And so there have been interpretations of this that have this image of the church is built on like a castle or a house or another structure, and sometimes it's the gates of hell, and hell is attacking sort of this structure, but it won't win. The church will hold up in a defensive position. But that's not what this image is, and it's not what's being done. The idea is one that the gates are not going to stay closed, and somehow the gates are not going to prevail, which means like the person, whatever's inside the netherworld, is going to be able to get out. And this is kind of going to be at the center of what's happening here. This part of Matthew is really at the culmination, the peak of the gospel. You're really touching on the essence of the gospel, and in that, what Matthew sees the essence of the Christian message. And so this is a lot going on here. And we're going to, in doing this and stitching this together, we're really kind of tapping into the backbone of the gospel. Now, there are other interpretations that you'll see. People on the Catholic side, there's be a lot of stuff that would say Peter is the rock, and Peter and the popes afterwards. So the church is built on Peter, and the church is built on the popes. Now, there's probably some truth to that in interpretation. But, if what we're going to be looking at is sort of the backbone, if you're thinking of it as the bone structure of the message, or if you're thinking of it as the heart, and then there are veins and arteries that come out of that, these other interpretations can be powerful and they're great, but they're not the actual, what we're getting into now is going to be the backbone or the heart. So on the Catholic side, you see kind of Peter as the rock, and the Pope is the rock, and so now you have to be on top of the rock if you're part of the church. And then you have people who identify as Bible-believing Christians, and they'll say, no, it's the faith. Faith is the rock. And now that might be that's a kind of, there's truth in that interpretation too. And what happens is, whereas if we can get to see the backbone, we get to see that each of these interpretations are like ribs or other bones in the body that are important and they're great, but they're not mutually exclusive. And this is what it gets into. No, it's this, it's not that. It's this and not that. That's because we haven't tapped into the backbone, or we haven't found like the core and the heart. And this is what the author is looking to bring out. So the other interpretations, they're good, and then they become separate in a certain way. And now you have this, but not that. Whereas it may be that both are valid, and then they get augmented a bit when you see how they might come together in the backbone or the heart of it. So this is the gates of the netherworld. So now let's look over here in the burial. You've got, after Joseph puts the body in the tomb, then he rolled a huge stone across the entrance to the tomb. What's that? That's the gate. That's the gate to the place of the dead. So you've got this image now of, okay, inside the rock, and here's the closing up. You've also got now this whole thing. I've got the whole thing highlighted, and we're going to take it out a little bit slowly, but it's a cool thing because, again, it's only in Matthew's gospel that you have this talk of the rock and building the church and the gates of the netherworld. It's also only in Matthew's gospel that you have this guard at the tomb. So there's a relationship that's going on. The guard at the tomb. So look at how, you've got the Pharisees and the chief priests. They say, this is the problem, is after 3 days I will be raised up. We're going to keep coming back to that because this is going to be part of the whole center of this message and what this rock has to do with. After 3 days I will be raised up. Give orders then, so that the grave be secured. Again, so you've got the Pharisees and the chief priests, and they're going to make sure that gate doesn't open. So this is the idea, right? Secured until the third day. The disciples come and steal them and say to the people, He's been raised from the dead. This last one, okay, the guard is yours. Secure it as best as you can. They went and secured. Secured. See how he's emphasizing. Now the word secured, now you may not get access to this. I'm going to add in bits of information that if you don't have this background, you don't need it. I'm going to add it in to add a little more depth and color from my perspective. But what I'm showing you doesn't need to have these added in pieces of information, because if you didn't have those, you wouldn't be able to understand, right? You'd have to be some scholar, but that's not the point here, because you can still find your way when you start to, once you find the stitching together and you begin to read these passages together, you find your own insights. And then you can do your own research, and then you can start to dig a little deeper and let it, and that's the light and the food that comes. It's exciting. So secure, now that word comes in the Greek is from asphalt. Now asphalt for us is the tar and the gravel mixed together. But the actual, back in those times, asphalt was basically just the tar. So, and it's used for sealing. So you would put the tar on, and what that means, nothing can get in or out. That's the point. So now it's interesting because in the Noah's Ark, after the ark was built, he covered it with this tar, bitumen or tar. It's the same thing. And also when Moses, his mother, placed him as a baby into the river, she made a basket and she covered it with this tar, asphalt. So, and then Moses is inside of it. So what happens with Noah? Well, he's inside this sealed with tar sort of structure of the ark, and after the 40 days he comes out. And then what happens with Moses? Again, he's inside this basket, closed up, and then, after a certain amount of time, he comes out. So this is, Matthew is very much, I think, kind of touching on that with his word of the tar. The grave be tarred, in a sense. So the sealing up, so nothing getting it out, and also the references to, in salvation history, these moments where you enter into this image, it's an image of the tomb, and it's tarred and sealed, impossible to get out, and yet they come out. And so now you see there are two things that they do. Seal the stone, they put a seal on, so that, the reason of the seal is so that when it's opened, you can tell if it's been opened or not. It's like the seal on a jar. You open the jar, now you can see it's been opened or not. And then the other is putting a guard. So you have those two things, the seal and then the guard. And that's how that he's going to make sure that nothing gets in or out. There's no way. And that's their plan. So Matthew's setting that up. So let's, for now, because we're going to move on, there's another second half to this right side here. Now let's kind of go back to upon this rock. There's the other dimension. I will build my church upon this rock. So right after this, he's saying this. Jesus says he's going to go to Jerusalem, suffer and die, and on the third day be raised. So he's going to the tomb, and on the third day he's going to be raised up. So Peter takes him aside and he's going to rebuke him, and again, he gets confronted. So Peter, as the name of the rock, it's interesting. The Aramaic for Peter, which is not used here, but just the Aramaic for Peter that Paul uses later for Peter's name, it means hollow rock, which is very much the same as the rock that's used in these locations here, which is this tomb, this hollowed out rock. So here you still have this carrying this imagery of, at least in the Greek here, Peter as a rock. Is he the hollowed out rock, or is he, in this case, the stone that's blocking the tomb? So there's a little bit of a play going on in that, possibly. But one of the things I want to take away is that it's about going to the tomb, and the reason the whole Christian message is going to be about going to the tomb. Is it the end of the story or not? Are the gates closed and you can't get out, or is there going to be a coming out after you enter the tomb? And this is really kind of what's happening at the center. Now Peter, and he personifies the disciples, has left, wife and family. So remember, there's a certain passage where it notes that they've left everything. So there's a sense of that they're in this sense of the tomb already. To be a disciple means that you've already you haven't entered actual death, but you've entered this death to your life, the way of life that you have and the life that you've been living. So in a sense, to be a disciple and following Jesus in this time, you're in a sense in the tomb. And so here's what's happening is that, so Peter, being in the tomb, he gets this revelation from God, He's in this special place in the tomb and he can see. And the revelation that comes from faith. So it's not revealed by flesh and blood, it's a revelation of the Father. But at the same time, they're not done yet. And it's not going to be until after Jesus completes this whole thing and then the coming of the Spirit that's going to complete their time. And then they're going to be able to see it too. So in this time, Peter, there's that sense of that, okay, Peter is in the tomb and in a sense is still in process of all of that. Now, when you look over here, though, the chief priests and the Pharisees, see, they're just against this whole thing of the 3 days will be raised up. They don't get the revelation, and they're not in the tomb, so to speak, in the sense that that the disciples are. By leaving everything, they're with Jesus in a sense, having died. And so this time of, and I mean that in the sort of sense of a spiritual tomb where you've left a lifestyle behind. So now the chief priests and the Pharisees have not, so they're they represent in this rejection of, no, the death is the end. Death is the end and there's nothing's going in or out afterwards. And now Peter is wrestling, he's kind of in between. So he's still in the process, but he's in the tomb. So that's the important thing, is that Peter's still in the tomb. Now there's the other dimension, is he being the barrier or not? Is he kind of being the gate? That's the obstacle, or is the other dimension too? Is that Peter is the tomb, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And that's kind of what he's going to end up being. Peter's going to carry the word Peter, hollowed out rock, and with this context, Peter is this image of the tomb, and that's who he is, and that's his kind of vocation and calling. We're going to see that image of that tomb. And that's going to be at the center of Matthew's gospel, really. So now he personifies what every disciple is. And all of us have Peter, all of us have the tomb. If we have died in some sense to ourselves. And so now we become we're living in the tomb, but we kind of manifest the tomb in who we are. And so this is in a sense a compliment. You're Peter, you're the tomb. But he's still maybe being kind of the gate. So he's in transition. And now the conditions of discipleship. So here's the thing. As Jesus said, whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross and follow. We're going to the tomb. And whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. We'll get back to that in the next page here. So this is what's, we're kind of looking at this related to building on the rock, which is now we're going to see as the tomb, and the church is going to be built on it. And that's disciples. The community of disciples is going to be the church, built on the tomb. Well, it's going into the tomb. This is kind of the beginning of discipleship, and so the tomb is the rock in a sense, So let's move on to, and this is the last part of the scripture, the resurrection. So after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, approached, rolled back the stone, and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow. The guards were shaken with fear of him, became like dead men. What's happening? The gates of the netherworld are not prevailing, and this is the idea. So the gate, you can see the angel descends, approaches, rolls back the stone, and sits on it. His appearance was like this. The guards were shaken with fear and became like dead men. So what was securing it? It's the seal. So roll back the stone, the seal is gone, and you got the guards are like dead men, basically incapacitated, wiped out. So there's two things that were the effort to keep nothing from entering or leaving the imagery have been removed. So So the gates of the netherworld have not prevailed. And we can go right away back to, this is the second part of the report of the guard, is while they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that happened. So the chief priests, they pay off the guards, and it's a big sort of cover up and failure. They go away with the tails between their legs, basically. And this is going to be different. This is where we get to some of this part. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So here's the chief priests and the Pharisees. They wouldn't lose their life, so they hold on to life. But what's happened in this end time is they've lost it. So they've lost joy. They don't have success. They don't have. They've experienced this failure. Their whole plan has been undone. Whereas we're going to see here the disciples who left everything and entered into the tomb in a sense of discipleship, they now have joy. They're all excited, and everything's like turned around. So here's the next part of, again, building the rock, building the church on the rock is the next thing that the angel says. Now this is the center. So here's a big moment, because here's this angel sitting on the stone. He's sitting on, the gate has been opened, and he's sitting on the gate. And this is a big message. This is like the central message. So you're going to pay it, do not be afraid. I know that you are seeking Jesus the crucified. He is not here. He has been raised just as he said. This is everything. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he's been raised from the dead, and he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. And then they actually get to see him on the way, and he says, don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. This is it. What's happened is the gates have not prevailed. The tomb is opened up. The tomb is not the end. There's a resurrection, and there's a life. And now Galilee is going to be a meeting place. So there's a next step. There's a new stage happening. And Galilee, this is another side thing, is that Galilee in Mark, and then later Matthew is the place of discipleship. So this is, again, tying with this condition of discipleship and what it is to be connecting to Jesus' passion and the conditions of discipleship. His death, and what it is, the death to our life and lifestyles to become disciples. We enter into the tomb. And in the tomb, though, it's not the end. So that whatever dying we do, and eventually our own death, it's not an end. The gate doesn't close. It's not the Roach Motel. So the gate will not prevail. So this is on the rock of the tomb. That's where the church is built. And you can see this is what's happening. Jesus is risen, and now all the disciples in this church this is what it's all built on. Everything is coming back to, it's centered on this hollowed out rock, which is the tomb, which has the stone rolled away, which means that this is the Christian mystery. This is at the foundation of all of the Christian mystery. And so that's the foundation of the whole church. This then enters into anything and everything that the Christian life is about. It enters into then forming the foundation with the other apostles and all of the building up of the church of people and believers. It all starts with that tomb. So the tomb that Jesus has entered into death, and it it's not held it back. So he's come out and resurrected a new life. This is it. And let's see okay, so we go back here. So this theme is, I hope this kind of brings out, I could keep going on some other things, but I'll leave it there for now. There's this relationship between these two passages, these two sections, where you see that the rock, noticing that and going and looking, and there's a sort of discernment in that, and finding another place where there's a stitch. It changes in each place how we understand each passage. It complements and completes and fills out so that we can understand the message that the author is looking to share. So I hope you've enjoyed this, I'm going to add one last thing that, again, you wouldn't necessarily need to know, and you may not know, but I'll add it in to add a little more to this meditation that I've been sharing, especially in the sense of Peter, who represents all of us, being this hollow rock, which is tomb, and so we live that at the center of the Christian mystery, and that's what the whole church is built on. And then we are that in that sense. We kind of bring that presence to others of this death having become new life, and death is not the end. There's in Caesarea Philippi, because this is part of the context that's happening. Now, Caesarea Philippi it's north of, in that area, north of Galilee, and so it's actually near the source of the Jordan River. And this is sort of the peak of the Gospel of Matthew. Now, in Caesarea Philippi is the location of a cave in a large rock structure. That was the ancient ceremonial center for the worship of the god Pan. Now, Pan is the god of kind of wild spring life. So he was worshipped as a god in a sense of fertility, most especially. So the ceremonies that used to be had, now this is another picture, here's that mouth of that cave entrance. There used to be water that would flow from there, apparently. And here you have this temple area for Pan and these other worship areas for Pan, and here would be this sort of sacrifice and other activity areas, ceremony areas. It included, deep sexual activities and possibly even the sacrifice of people. The idea is a spring fertility rites. And so what they believed is that gods in the winter would go and hibernate. Hibernate where? Now this is understood to be Hades, the place of the dead. And this is the mouth or the gate of Hades. And so when Jesus is bringing the disciples there, this is what's there. This is the center of Caesarea. This is what Caesarea Philippi is all about. It was renamed after the new Caesar, but it had always been the center of the sanctuary of Pan, you can see in the picture. So this is where they are when Jesus is saying, on this rock I will build my church. And where he's telling Peter, you are rock. So this is what's right in front. This is a place of the dead. So it's the image of tomb. This is the context that Jesus and the disciples are in when this conversation is happening. So now you need to know that, and we kind of, in looking and connecting that other place of rock, we see the same thing that reinforces, But this is, the location is Jesus saying with Peter, you're rock, and on this rock right here, the place of the dead, is where I'll build my church, and the gates will not prevail against it. So the idea was gods would go and hibernate into the place of the dead, and the only way to get them out would be to do this ceremony. So I'll leave that for you, more reflection that you might enjoy in your own time. But I hope that also it just adds a little more color and depth to what's happening in the scripture passage, and hopefully it encourages you to start to dig more when you find things that draw your interest. And so keep looking for food in the desert. Look, when things strike your attention, you have questions and you wonder about what does this phrase mean? You see a word or some story. Hey, look for it in other places. See if there's a stitch happening. And look to compare another gospel. Say, hey, it's not happening in that gospel. So the author is doing something here. And then look for that stitching together and draw relations within the gospels. And then you're following how the gospels were written. And you get to see glimpses of some of the backbone of the gospels. And then hopefully you find new light and inspiration, and that gives you food for your time and whatever desert that you may be experiencing. So thanks. And I hope to have another video coming up soon, a part 5, that's about the Good Shepherd and the washing of the feet. So hopefully catch up in the next video. Take care. Bye.